Thank you, everybody, for joining us in GIS Colorado's inaugural session of Geo-Ruckus, Stirring Up Spatial Solutions. My name is Ronald Burns. I'm a GIS Colorado board member. Today, I'm joined here with Nathan Lowry, who is on the Communications Committee, and also we both are the chairs of that committee. Thank you so much. We also are here with Dr. Joseph Kerski with his session entitled Expanding Horizons, the Ethics of GIS Now and in the Future. So Dr. Kerski is a geographer with a focus on the use of geographic information systems in education. He has served as the president of the National Council of Geographic Education and has given 2 TED Talks on the whys of where. He holds 3 degrees in geography and has served as a geographer in 4 major sectors of society, including government, academia, private industry, and nonprofit organizations. Joseph has authored over 100 chapters and articles and 200 podcasts in GIS, education, space, place, and related topics. He has visited over 350 schools and 400 universities around the world. He regularly conducts professional development for educators. He has created over 6,200 videos, 1,000 lessons, 1,000 blog essays, and authored 12 books, including Interpreting Our World, Spatially Thinking in Environmental Contexts, Essentials of Our Environment, Spatial Mathematics, Tribal GIS, International Perspectives on Teaching and Learning, the GIS Guide to Public Domain Data, and others. But as a lifelong learner, he feels as though he's getting started and thus actively seeks mentors, partners, and collaborators. You can visit his website at https://www.josephkerski.com. And without further ado, we present Dr. Kerski.
Well, many thanks, Ronald. Greetings all. Joseph Kerski here with you. I'm happy to be the inaugural Geo-Ruckus host and presenter. I love GIS Colorado, and I have been a member of this community since probably before some of you listening to this, watching this video, or participating live were born. But that's okay. As my host just graciously and very kindly said, I feel like I'm just getting started. I feel this is a very exciting time for GIS, and I'm happy. In fact, my first presentation at GIS in the Rockies was about teaching with the web, teaching and learning GIS with the web. Wow, what a concept back in the 1990s. So I've long been a member and a big fan of the community, and I'm happy to be a part of this and a part of your lives going forward. I am definitely available for chatting during this session. We've got a nice small group, so if you want to raise some issues, that's fine with me. We also have a chat box and a Q&A and all that stuff that my wonderful co-hosts here are monitoring. So I do feel that this topic is relevant, interesting, and will remain so. In fact, I would argue that it's going to be even more relevant going forward for the reasons that I will articulate here in the next 3 hours. Just kidding, we don't have 3 hours. Just wanted to make sure you folks were on your toes. And we're going to keep this brief, but this whole presentation is obviously, as you can see here in the URL, a story map. And so I'm going to go ahead and maybe my colleagues can put this in the chat box for me, but this story map is called Teaching and Learning Ethics with Spatial Thinking and Geotechnologies. And as you can see here, it is available. It's a online web mapping application called a story map, which probably many of you have created in the past. So the idea is, and I'm going to go ahead here and put this in the chat box here because it's probably too clunky for my colleagues to figure out what that URL is. So I'll just put it in here in the chat box. So you're welcome to explore this. I'm only going to touch on segments of this because this topic is just so vast. But just to kind of set the stage here, there's related terms that I think we should pick apart, at least in some fashion. We could spend the whole webinar talking about what equity, equality, and ethics actually are. And like a lot of things in geotechnology, they are dynamic terms. They're changing. They're subject to and welcome debate about what they are and what they should be and how we can best wrap our minds around these terms going forward. But as you have just heard from Ronald, I'm in GIS education, so I think a lot about these topics. How do we teach with them? Why do we teach with them? How do we learn with these tools and topics? But I know many of you are GIS professionals in government, industry, nonprofit, and elsewhere, academia perhaps, and you use geospatial technologies on a day-to-day basis. And so you're wondering, well, okay, Joseph, what about for me? How can I embrace these topics going forward in my own work? But let's talk about equity, for example, the quality of being fair and social equity. You can see the terms that I've got laid out there again, subject to debate, the fair, just, and equitable management of all institutions serving the public directly or by contract, and the fair and equitable distribution of public services, implementation of public policy, etc. The connection to education, to me, strikes home in terms of what really drives us forward, why many of us got into geospatial technologies in the first place. First of all, we want to make a positive difference in people's lives, right? The everyday decisions that you make that are empowered by GIS are enabled by your core beliefs that you really want to help people. You want to help the planet, you care about the planet, you care about its people. And in terms of education, we believe that all students can thrive and that each student has a valid and unique contribution to make to our field, to our community. And we seek to empower all learners in GIS, students, GIS professionals, and others to be change agents, positive change agents on the planet. GIS is one of those technologies truly for good. In fact, there's a website that Esri, my organization, hosts called GIS for Good, and it's all about the Jane Goodall Elephant Foundation using GIS and city planners using GIS for good, and et cetera. So GIS being a positive force on our planet. More about that in a bit. But I also want to submit that GIS and spatial thinking are rather disruptive. They break down barriers, let's say in a county government, between the assessors and the public works and the parks and rec. And by nature, that's what GIS was always intended to do, is to break down barriers and get people working together. And we do believe that students will be wiser decision makers when they go forth in their careers. And I'm sure that all of you on the webinar tonight and all of you watching this in the future can attest to the power that GIS brings to your everyday decision making. And it offers access to resources and to tools to make smarter decisions. And so to me, that strikes close to home in terms of equity and ethics, because in terms of the ethics, we'll talk more about that in a bit. But in terms of equity, it's one of those tools that allows more and more people in a broader sector of society to make these smarter decisions. It's no longer the sort of the niche technology that GIS was in its early years. And for good reason, it was a niche technology because it was very clunky and hard to learn. And I won't belabor you with the history of GIS, but many of you watching this will attest to, yeah, it was really hard to get data into a GIS and in the right map projection, in the right data format. There's still challenges, right? The Earth is still a system, and GIS is trying to understand the world through a interactive, dynamic, rapidly evolving set of tools and technologies, right? So GIS is always going to be inherently a little bit complex just because the world is complex and changing, right? The Earth is a dynamic planet. But thinking about your own background and how you would embrace these topics going forward, what unique strengths do you bring to your teaching, your research, your work in GIS? And I would just submit that each one of you has a very valid and worthy contribution to make to this field. So I'm glad you're a part of this community, and I'm glad to be a part of it too. Now, part of ethics, I believe, is to evaluate, okay, do I trust, do I have some faith in what the speaker is speaking about? That's a part of being a critical data consumer. And so, my co-host here very kindly talked about my background, but I'm going to just give you this graphic, not to bore you to tears, but just so you have some background in terms of, okay, well, do I have any does Joseph bring any credibility to this topic? And I'm not the authority on using ethics in geospatial technology or teaching about ethics, but as Ronald mentioned earlier, I have background in 4 different sectors of society: nonprofits, government, academia, and in private industry as education manager here at Esri. And by the way, if you know of any educators or if you have kids, or if you care about your alma mater, or if you're caring about that school down the street from your house, and if they're using any geospatial technology and spatial thinking, for any of those reasons, or you care about the future of your own organization and where those graduates are going to come from, let them know that we actually have an education team to support them. And the team has existed since 1992. Now, I was back at the U.S. Geological Survey back in 1992, but the team has existed for 30 plus years. So we didn't just decide yesterday we should be working with educators and students and facility managers on campus. We really do care, and it's a long-term commitment. So let them know that we're here to support them in their use of GIS in teaching, learning, and also research, and also in campus facility management. So that's what our team is here, and that's what we're empowered to do. The other reason why I share this is because I want to impart to you watching this that you're not stuck in the same organization your entire career. You can see that I've moved around, and so can you if you choose to. And the other thing that I want to encourage you with this graphic is that geospatial technology and spatial thinking are going to be valuable no matter what organization you go into in the future, as it has been for me. So thinking about your own organization and what you bring to it, think about your own background. What kind of things did you do as a kid that, or as a young person or as an undergrad that brought you to this moment? In my case, I actually made maps when I was a kid on big poster board. I know that's pretty geeky, but you did some geeky things too that maybe none of your friends like doing, but you wanted to do them, and that's okay. And so, I'm just encouraging you that, okay, all my maps were on big poster board, with colored pencils and crayons and stuff. I had all my streets labeled. I had docks and, airports and exits on freeways and all kinds of other things like that. But thinking about what do you bring to your organization as well? And why should you care about teaching with GIS? Again, you've got kids, you've got an alma mater, you've got a school down the street from you, active in Scouts or 4-H or Girl Scouts or whatever. You're a mentor to others. But I would just submit these things. Maps are widely used, right, as an effective means of communication with instant apps, story maps, dashboards. I mean, maps are all around us, right? You've got a fitness app on your phone and it's got a map in it. And if you go around the block one more time on your bicycle or running, hey, you get an extra little bit of, steps. Um, so maps are all around us, and they're increasingly used in business, civil engineering, and in areas outside of GIS geography. Now, many of us came into GIS through those three areas, but increasingly people are coming into GIS, as you folks probably are well aware, in these other disciplines, an expanding array of disciplines. And so there's increasing concern and thought, I think, that needs to go into our discussion tonight about, okay, if they don't come into GIS with a sort of a background that many others have had because they see certain tools that they want to use, but maybe they're not thinking about, okay, that map projection actually matters, that color choice that you use on your maps actually matters, that symbology that you choose, the classification method that you choose, that influences how people perceive the issue that you're mapping and displaying, whether it's urban greenways or urban or community gardens or water quality or population change or anything else, right? How you display, how you communicate through mapping tools actually affects people's views of that issue, and it affects their opinion of that issue. So maps are very powerful means of communication. I love the fact that we have these tools at our fingertips, and I'm not pining for the old clunky days by any means, but with the increasing ease of making maps, right? In 60 seconds, we could have a map of population density, median age, median income of Arvada, right? Within 60 seconds at our fingertips in, for example, ArcGIS Online and many other mapping tools. Because it's so easy relative to in the past, I think that just lends additional concern and thought that needs to be made in the creation and how we communicate with maps. So, and mapping products. Why do ethics matter then? Well, everyone is a map producer, right? It's not just the USGSs and the Esris and the Boulder County, open space and other organizations represented by your organizations and mine this evening, but everyone's a map producer, including the general public. In fact, on Monday, I'm teaching a class. If you really care about this and you want to say, hey, family member or friend of yours, how can you, why should you care about mapping? And haven't all the maps already been made? what makes a map good or bad, and all those kinds of things. I am teaching a class at the University of Denver on Monday, the next 2 Monday evenings. This is very accessible, no jargon, no raster versus vector, nothing in terms of jargony stuff. It's all about mapping. So it's a nice bite-sized, gluten-free way of introducing friends and family members to why this actually all matters and some of the interesting, fascinating modern mapping tools they may not be aware of. So that's happening. It's called Mapping the Future, and that's on the next 2 Mondays. But with great capability comes great responsibility, right? We all have a responsibility to create maps that are thoughtful, that are clear, that communicate well, et cetera, and more about that in a bit. And there's growing concern for geotechnology's role in location privacy, surveillance, global conflicts, and much more that we could talk about. And also about the replicability and reproducibility crisis in science. What do I mean by that? I mean, there's a growing concern that we've got these scientific essays, articles, peer-reviewed chapters, et cetera, that I and you and many others have written. And increasingly people say, that's great to see those results, but I want the data. I want the data to be shared so I could build on, Nathan or Morgan or whoever else is on here, their study, and then build on it. Why do I have to start from scratch every time? That's hindering progress. So there's also that. And if we do share the data, what kinds of disclaimers and additional, and what about, copyright and all that other stuff? Interesting. And also, there's a growing awareness of the pitfalls in making inferences from geodata and GIS analysis. For example, the ecological fallacy, not with ecology, but the ecological fallacy in geography and GIS in terms of dealing with aggregates. A correlation at the aggregate does not imply correlation at the individual level. Here's an example. Suppose COVID infection is correlated with percent Asian at the census tract level. This does not imply that individual Asian descendants are more susceptible to COVID infection or worse, but implies only that areas with high proportions of Asians also have high rates of infection. So those kinds of nuances, do people understand those? And if not, how much time can we as a community, could we spend on helping people understand those things? You probably heard this example as well. Hey, there's a lot of mobile homes that are damaged by tornadoes. Are tornadoes attracted to mobile homes? Now, you and I know that's not the case, but looking at a map, right, the general public might say, oh, there's this relationship. A lot of mobile homes are damaged by tornadoes. So to me, one of the things to keep in mind, maps have an aura of authenticity. They tend to be believed. Maybe because maps were the purview of those small number of organizations that could make them for centuries, really, right? The Ordnance Survey of the UK, the US Geological Survey, Rand McNally, Nat Geo. I mean, they were the mapping agencies, the science and mapping agencies. So because you and I can create maps nowadays, take that responsibility seriously and do not unintentionally or intentionally mislead your audience. I think it's easy for us to do the intentional part, but are we unintentionally misleading someone by our color choices and classification methods? A good map teaches you to ask a better question. I love that. Maps have always been inspiring in some ways to people, and a good map should inspire them to say, well, that's interesting. What about the relationship between these two variables? Or what if I changed the scale? Or what if I looked at these two variables? Or what if I looked at the mountains in Colorado instead of the Great Plains, et cetera? Maps are representations of reality, right? They're with digital twins and these wonderful 3D tools that we've got at our fingertips, and many others that we could name. Maps are becoming very, very rich in content, aren't they? But they're still representations of this wonderfully diverse planet of ours. They're not the real thing. They're very closer and closer approximations, but they're representations and very useful ones, but they're still representations. I still think that that's a good thing to keep in mind. Now, with GIS users and ethics, the dominant theme of the user experience has been this sort of caveat emptor. What I mean by that is the user is free to decide or choose which functions to employ on which data and is left to interpret the results. And I got a lot of that from Michael Goodchild, who probably many of you know was one of the original GIS science professors at UC Santa Barbara. And now ArcGIS Pro, for example, and many other tools we can name, have thousands of functions. But the philosophy is still remaining the same. It'll be interesting to see how AI changes things, and we can chat more about that in a bit. Ethical behavior is largely the responsibility of the user. Does the user know about the modified aerial unit problem, right, that many of us studied when we studied GIS, the ecological fallacy that I mentioned earlier, location privacy, spatial dependence, things like that? And how can we build tools that make ethical decisions? Do we have warnings? Do we have pop-ups? Do we have stored workflows that they can follow? Something else. So let's talk about why teaching and engaging with ethics a little bit deeper now. Now, what I'm talking about this evening is not really brand new because many of us in grad school read this book by John Pickles at UNC Chapel Hill, The Social Implications of GIS. This was written way back in 1995. Again, probably before many of you were born. But the point is, some of these things have been talked about, but it's only more recently with the advent of WebGIS and services, data as services and data libraries and the ease of use have these become more prominent. There's a rising concern, of course, with AI and its influence on GIS and decision making, rightly so. Again, we can unpack that here in a bit. There's some new initiatives, and I'm going to point you to some resources here at the end of the presentation this evening. Codes of Ethics, Mapmaker's Mantra that a couple of my colleagues at Esri wrote, the American Geographical Society's Ethical Geo column, the Social Science Inclusion here, sponsored by our chief scientist, Dr. Dawn Wright, that many of you know. So there's some resources and codes of ethics to follow. Some of you are GISPs. I'm a GISP as well from the GIS Certification Institute. There is a ethical statement that you need to sign, and I think it's a good thing when you're taking the GISP exam or putting together your GIS portfolio for the GISP. So some of the tenets, if you're teaching ethics, and I'm not implying that all of you are professors, I know that's not the case, but if you're teaching a workshop for your fellow colleagues at your county open space department, or you're in a state government agency, et cetera. So you're responsible. I think many of us are responsible in the world of GIS to teaching and training others, whether it's our coworkers or some of your adjuncts in courses through community colleges, et cetera. But ethics is too important to be relegated to the end of a workshop that you're teaching for your colleagues or for the end of a course that you're teaching. It shouldn't be week 15, we'll talk about ethics. You can sprinkle it in some ways that I'll describe here. Some of you know that I'm a very practical, in my approach. I really believe that GIS is best learned and taught by doing. And so I've got some actual practical examples of how to do this. And it should be integrated into any course, not just GIS courses, where the where is important and where communication matters, which is, I would argue, just about any discipline. Now, where can I effectively teach this? Again, GIS courses, sure, but in non-GIS courses. And one of the goals of the team that I mentioned earlier that I am on is, well, there's two goals. The deeper understanding of GIS. So GIS as a whole platform, collecting data, mapping it, analyzing it, communicating the results, not GIS equates to learning specific software. I'm going to learn GIS, ArcGIS Pro 3.3, Joseph. Okay, that's a good tool, but it's not the gamut of GIS in the modern age, right, in 2024. So the deeper understanding of GIS. And then the second goal is the broader distribution and array of GIS in a multitude of disciplines. It should be in, I would argue, in civil engineering. It needs to be taught in supply chain management and School of Business. It needs to be taught in sociology. It needs to be a great tool for teaching cultural geography or mathematics. I just wrote a whole book on that, teaching mathematics with interactive mapping. So the point is broader use of GIS throughout education. So how can I effectively teach and learn about ethics? Well, here's some interesting, hopefully, and practical ways of doing that. Location privacy. Hey, folks, you've got a phone. How many of your phone apps are sharing your location right now? And does it matter? Interesting. And how do you know how to turn off those location services if you need to? Why would you need to? I have this discussion with students of all ages all the time. Hey, Joseph, if I'm have to give my location, true. True, you have to give your location for certain things. If you want that ambulance to come to your house, your residence, you have to give your location. But when should you share your map data? Who should you share it with? We all have these capabilities, right, of sharing spatial data and services with others. I work with tribal governments. They have sacred sites. You could name additional examples in your own workplace. I'm a member of the caving community. There's a National Cave Protection Act. You can't share specific cave locations. And there's so many other national security. There's so many other examples of when not to share data. It's equally important to talk about when not to share and as well as when to share. I also like this, the think method. Is your map true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind? I don't think we have this discussion very often about, is your map kind? But maybe we should. But the think acronym might be helpful. And this is overlaid on my favorite landscape, Mesa County, Colorado, which is where I'm from. FIPS code 08077. I know that's pretty geeky. 08 for Colorado, 077 for Mesa County. Maybe there's some Western slopers on the call tonight. Anyway, but one effective technique is to show some bad maps. I know many people in GIS actually have a set of terrible, horrible, for many reasons, maps. But think about expanding that a bit. This was a data feed, and we love having these data feeds at our fingertips, don't we? Real-time data feeds. This was online for a whole year. Cleburne, Texas. I know it gets hot in Texas, but this is really, really hot. And look at the precipitation rate. This is like Noah's flood here. And the wind speed. Oh my gosh, it's like on Io or Jupiter. Anyway, the point is, all these readings are wrong. And if you interpolated the surface without being critical of the data, you'd have this big peak at Cleburne, Texas for many of these variables. And so I finally took a screenshot before it was corrected in Indeed. But it took a whole year for this one to be corrected. So the point is, there are bad maps, as you can see here in my set here, that is a link on that story map. But in here, I have loads of bad map examples ranging from, this kind of stuff that you've probably seen to these kinds of things that are, I know they're often shared and they're fun, and I don't want you to think I'm, Mr. Johnny Raincloud here. But some of these things are favorite foods in every state. They don't have a how many people were surveyed. Is it two people in the office? Hey, you're from Nebraska. What's your favorite food? I'll put it on the map. There's very little metadata in some of these things. So, hey, thanks, Nathan. Awesome. Much appreciated. Yeah, there's no shortage of these kinds of things, but it helps. But also these sorts of things, which I have in my spatial reserves data blog, which I'll mention in a moment. But the offset, go to Google Maps and pan over to China. The vectors are offset from the raster, and neither one are correct. Interesting. Why is that? We could unpack that as well. Let's talk about the 4 C's of data quality. But before I do, I want to mention that page, that data blog of mine, which sounds super boring. It really does. But it came out of a book that a colleague and I wrote for Esri Press that actually Ronald mentioned at the beginning, called the GIS Guide to Public Domain Data. And every week we post something about, for example, where to find data, like this one from 3 weeks ago. New agricultural census data available. So I'll review data portals, data sites, talk about how to get into it, if it's user-friendly or not, in my view, et cetera. But also resources, for example, the Penn State GIS ethics site. So where to find data, how do I know if it's any good, so data quality, and then societal issues like ethics, copyright, location privacy. So this resource from Penn State, for example, these GIS ethics case studies are really good ones. A GIS analyst is asked to exclude pertinent data from maps prepared for a public hearing. Interesting. Should precise locations of controversial hunting stations be public information? And so on. You can see that these are really good conundrums. And I'll share a few as well. My colleague here at Esri, not long after she started working here, was asked to come up with by an organization. We want to show that the Northeast USA has a higher percentage of vehicle collisions with bicyclists and motorcycles. And so my colleague looked at the data and came back to that organization. Well, the data doesn't show that the Northeast is more prominent. Well, can you, so they went back and forth for a while. It didn't show it. So finally, that organization was disappointed, but my colleague stood up for, okay, the data doesn't show that. Sorry, no matter how we massage the data. I personally, in my book, The Tribal GIS, went around a while with our editors of that book. Most book editors, rightly so, look at the different chapters and say, hey, they've got to be sort of in the same tone. Otherwise, the book is not going to flow. In this case, though, I'm working with the tribal GIS community. And their voice is very important. I was very adamant with them that I don't want this to be the Joseph book. I want it to be your story and your story. So when it came time for me to work with my editing team, I said, you cannot do a heavy standard edit on this. But Joseph, the stories are, some are real technical, some are not technical. They're in different voices. I know. That's exactly the point. It needs to be in different voices because I want their voices to shine through. So I had to, like many of you have had to have these moments in your career where you're putting the stake in the ground and you're standing up for what you truly believe in. And I was a little worried there. I wasn't my employment at Esri, and how's this going to go over? I'm making a case here that you will not do a heavy edit on this. So we all have these moments, and these are some of the good ones I think in the Penn State site. So the 4 C's of data quality. Data quality is part of this as well. Complete, coherent, correct, accountable. Can we trace the data, especially now with Geo AI? We've got about 100 tools, for example, in ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online that are AI driven. Feature extraction from imagery. I conducted a session a month ago, a workshop on generative AI for survey 123. I want a tree mapping survey. Generates 15 questions. I like some of those questions. Some questions I'm going to toss. Okay, interesting. Do we know in some of those models where how those models were trained? If there is metadata, do we understand the metadata as these models become more sophisticated and more powerful? So it's a very interesting time for us here in GIS. These AI tools are amazing. Being able to extract 99% of the trees, for example, from an image, or helicopters, or we've got one on elephants because the Jane Goodall Elephant Foundation wanted one to extract elephants from imagery. Fascinating. But anyway, the point is, as we use those, do we understand what goes into those models? And also imagery. And I mentioned this example a moment ago, but there's also an example that I've got in my spatial reserves data blog on, I'm going to put the link there as well in the chat box for a story on data being intentionally faked, satellite imagery being imprinted from one part of the world onto another part of the world. And we've got these capabilities, for example, in GIS. I know it snowed about a year and a half ago at our Redlands office in California. There was some measurable snowfall. Some of you may remember February 2023, but it did not accumulate. But in ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Pro, we've got these tools, right? We can accumulate the snow. We could do it in the Atacama Desert in Peru. We could do it in Southern California, but it didn't actually accumulate. But we've got these tools to do it. Just because the tools are there doesn't mean we should actually use every single piece of the tools, right? So key information may be left out of the metadata, and sometimes uncovering and being critical of the data is your, I think, stepping stone to being more ethical with your decisions that you make with data. So for example, when I was revising my Lyme disease map, it looked like all the Lyme disease rates went down, but it was only me saying, that's just maybe too good to be true. So indeed, calling the office there of the Office of Public Health in Rhode Island, and this was mapped by towns, census geography out there in New England. No, Joseph, it's because we had less funding in the last 10 years than in the 1990s. That's why it looks like the rates went down, but we had less funding to monitor the disease. So sometimes it actually takes an old-fashioned call or email to the data provider. Some of that is not necessarily in the metadata. And other examples we could talk about, especially in including your own data. I've got an example midway through this story map about being critical of your own data is also important, not just being critical of other data sets. Now, one of my colleagues here in Colorado who teaches at Colorado Mountain College, Dr. Dara Seidel, she's got a whole series of very intriguing geoprivacy videos where she interviews people and talks about these conundrums, including Repo Man. Repo Man is a repossessed vehicle employee and goes down the streets with cameras on the front of his car, taking images of license plates. So the discussion is, should he be doing that? Does he have any qualms about doing that? Who is he selling the data to? Who's that company that's employing him? Are they is that public information, these license plates? Anyway, another way to teach about location privacy and other things is some of you maybe have seen some of these gigapan images where you can see extremely fine detail. You zoom in, and in many of these, none of the faces are blurred. You can see on dashboards of people's cars. You can see inside open windows in apartment buildings, all kinds of interesting things there. And this is just one of them from a tower off in China. But there's lots of these that exist, and that's another way of teaching and learning about these. And then let's say you're using web mapping applications like instant apps, story maps. Can you use that image in your story map? Did you ask permission? If it's on Bob's Photos Inc., did you ask Bob? Right? I'm making that one up. But the point is, right? Or are you using public domain images or your own images or images that are copyright free or Creative Commons, etc.? So you're thinking about that as you're making these things. Just because that resources online doesn't mean you actually have permission to use it, right? In your own report, your own story map, etc. So can I use that picture? That's another one that we could unravel. I love this graphic because it kind of guides you through. Can you use that picture? And then another one that touches on the themes for this evening. Should I use that picture? Potential harm can occur to natural places. I'm sure you've seen articles about this as well from geotagged photographs. Hey, I went to this cool place in Botswana and suddenly 1,000 people are going there. And I've got the latitude, longitude, and now there's some potential disruption of local habitat and wildlife, et cetera, from a place being overloved because of that. Interesting. The GIS Certification Institute's Code of Ethics, I talked about that earlier. Pose scenarios and ask people, ask colleagues, ask students if you're teaching a course, when does the obligation to society outweigh the obligation to the employer, funder, or colleagues? Ooh, interesting. And then model good metadata strategies. I know you've heard this time after time, but it really does impact our work and is connected to what we're talking about this evening. Truth in labeling. If you're providing that data, and again, it's no longer just the small number of organizations around the world, you are a data producer. You're sharing information. Truth, are you providing truth in labeling your data, your content? And then as a data user, are you carefully evaluating, is that data fit for my use? Oftentimes I go behind people's shoulders if I'm in a face-to-face workshop or in an online setting, and I'll ask them, okay, you've just made this map and it's got these layers in it. Do you know where all those layers came from? What scale they were created at? Who created them? No, I don't know, Joseph. Uh, maybe you need to find out because it's important. It's easy to create these maps with many layers, but needing to know and being critical of them. Also, when people, students and others, ask me, is my map right? That's an interesting one to talk about these issues that we're talking about this evening. I don't know. I usually respond to that question, which is a good question, but does it aid in your understanding of the issue? And can you justify the choices you used in creating that map? Now, not faulting students for asking that question, but oftentimes they come out of a educational system that we have where they're being tested, right? And they're asked to regurgitate content. I mean, we've all had this experience. And so we want to get the right answer. And so we come into GIS with sort of some of that, I don't want to say baggage, but some of that background, right? We're thinking this has to be, what do I mean by is the map right? Again, does it help you? Does it help your users? Does it help the people that you're sharing with understand the energy, the water, the human health, whatever else you're mapping? And can you justify the choices? So there's some ethical initiatives that I think we should cover this evening. I know we're almost out of time, but I've got a paper out with some colleagues on locational privacy and the public interest that you're welcome to take a look at because we are seeking feedback on that. The map maker's mantra that I mentioned from Aileen Buckley and a couple of other colleagues on the cartographic team here at Esri about Alan Carroll, many of you know, is in charge of our story maps team. And be honest and accurate, transparent and accountable, minimize harm, seek to provide value, be humble and courageous. That's my favorite one. Be humble and courageous. So take a look at those as well. Data equity, reflections from the Equitable Data Working Group. A couple of things in there. But also, I think it's important to note and interesting that ethics are appearing more often than just in our Geo-Ruckus this evening with GIS Colorado. There increasingly in texts like this one, Conservation Social Science, Understanding People Conserving Biodiversity. I don't think we would have seen that title even of that book a few years back. Conservation Social Science? Interesting. It would have been physical geography, what's biodiversity, or it would be on conservation, but not combining the two. Fascinating to see these. Also, the Handbook of Geospatial Technologies that I and others contributed to not too long ago. That has loads of chapters on ethics and ethical issues. So that's just becoming more and more common. Now let's dig deeper. How do we dig deeper beyond the brief time that we've had together this evening? I've got, again, it's not the end all be all, but an ethical geo essay for the American Geographical Society. This is part of their ethical geo blog that I mentioned earlier. It's got a lot of authors in it. Not, I'm not the only one. So take a look at that sometime. The ethical geo blog from the American Geographical Society. And the spatial reserves data blog that I mentioned, that's all about where to find data, how do I know if it's any good, and can I trust it? What about these ethical issues? Some of you know about the UCGIS body of knowledge. It is an online textbook that many people use in higher education to supplement their other textbooks and other resources that they have students go through. But it's a peer-reviewed set of 300-ish chapters. I've got one on location privacy, but there's others in there that touch on these issues this evening. So in sum, I think that these issues are going to be increasingly important in the future as more and more people become empowered to use, analyze, create, communicate the results of spatial patterns through GIS. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg, right, in terms of the impact that GIS can have. And it's an exciting time to be in GIS. So I'm not putting the brakes on it. Sometimes people say, Joseph, GIS is evolving so fast. Can you Esri people, for example, slow it down a bit? Well, no, because people are asking us for tools and asking for solutions on wastewater or energy or some other field, and we've got to be able to give them the tools that they need right now to make those smarter decisions. That makes it challenging for you and I as GIS in the GIS community, to be sure, but that's why we need each other. That's why GIS Colorado exists and many other fine organizations to help you realize that you don't have to be the expert in all of GIS. Now, I remember back in the days where you pretty much could know most of GIS tools. Maybe some of you remember those days, but no longer. I mean, I think that ended for me about 2004-ish, where I realized, you know what? There's so much that I don't even know anything about, but I've got colleagues, I've got the community to rely on. So we do need each other, especially in this, kind of wild west of rapid evolution of tools. ArcGIS Online, for example, updates quarterly. What's going to happen in several years from now, or even sooner when it updates weekly? So the point I'm making there is don't get too tied to where the tools have to be in the box. In fact, with GeoAI, we're getting to close to the point, and you can see it in such tools as, for example, Business Analyst Web, where you're giving a prompt and okay, I want a median age map of Los Angeles County with median income. Done. Do I know what median is? So this tool is still important. Do I know what a census tract is? What scale is this at? Where does the data come from? So moving forward, this tool will still be the most important tool to cultivate, but I think we're getting closer to where we have to assemble all of these tools in our toolbox. So then that has implications on teaching and learning as well. What do we need to teach about GIS in the future? What do students need to learn? What do people in the workplace need to learn? I think the most important thing, though, to me is being curious, remaining curious, and wanting to help people in the planet. Those two things, being curious and wanting to help people in the planet, will guide you in your future journey with geospatial technology. Does anybody have any concerns, issues? I know I've just barely touched on some of these things tonight, but I hope this has been helpful and also provides you okay, this ethics subject is not some ethereal thing that I can't even wrap my mind around. But the next time you see, for example, a rainbow color palette used for, I don't know, median HDI variables for countries around the world. Is yellow more than blue? Is green more than red? It doesn't make any sense. Call that out gently, kindly, but this is not the most suitable color choice for this map. You have the power to take that data, of course, and use a more suitable color choice, just as one of many examples that we could raise. But I just want people to be thoughtful about these issues, but also be empowered to be able to help others to understand as you're mentoring colleagues in this world of geospatial technology. Thanks, Matt. Indeed. How to navigate their way forward in these waters. But thanks for being with me, folks. I do appreciate it. And thanks, Nathan and others, for sharing these links. I'm just looking at the chat we've got going on. Hope to see some of you at GIS in the Rockies here in the future and also at other events. And again, if I could just make one more, notion that or nudge for this mapping the future, there is a little bit of a fee. It doesn't go to me though. It goes to the DU, University of Denver Enrichment Program, which is all about lifelong learning. So just to run their program. But I guarantee that'll be lots of fun. I mean, I'm going to cover everything from the Babylonian clay tablets to Al-Idrisi's map on big plates of silver back in the 1100s. That must have been a hard map to fold. Get it? On two big plates of silver. Anyway, just wanted to mention that course again, but I'm available. I'm going to put my email address in the chat box here. I think many of you know how to get a hold of me, but looking forward to chatting with you in the future. Nathan, hi.
Hey, Dr. Kerski, I have questions. I have a plethora of questions, but I want to talk briefly, if you can, tell me a little bit about conceptual and applied ethical issues. In other words, I think it becomes a lot more salient and clear when we experience things that are in our career field. Usually painful experiences are the ones that are most instructive. How do we learn from them, and how do we encapsulate what we learn from them into a concept that can be shared and understood by others? Like if I share the dirty laundry right now of a certain employer, client that I've worked with in the past that might be sensitive, but I want to have a good comprehension of what it is that we learn from that experience and be able to share that meaningfully with others.
Yeah, I'm right with you, Nate. Share my personal story of working with the Esri press editors because it is my organization, and they were doing their job, right? They were doing what editors do. But it was one of those, like you say, we have these moments where we can reflect on, okay, I'm really glad that I stood up for what I believed was right there. And those indeed, like you say, are some of the most powerful experiences. How can we do that kindly and gently and in such a way that builds people up rather than tearing them down? I
Hey,
mean,
I can
yeah,
give
go ahead.
so one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we do within our own practice at the company I work for right now is to, do a good hot wash after the project experience. So we know what happened and what we would like to do to improve better. I think that's the best opportunity for us to capture some of that information and to put it in a non-attributable fashion so that it can be shared in a more generic way with others.
I love that. I wish that's a good reminder for me. I so often, and ditto from my colleagues, we're so busy, and I think many of probably everybody on the call can relate. You get done with this major project, and then you move right on to the next one, or it probably overlaps with the finishing, and you just move right on. You don't have. We should. I like what you're saying, and I'm going to remember that. I should pause. I had an old boss at the Census Bureau saying, Joseph, you need to pause more and reflect on what you learned from each project rather than just jumping to the next one. I think many of you probably have taken that Stephen Covey course, the 7 Habits, or some variant of that. But what I love most about what he's talking about is that you spend time in sector 2, the important but not urgent areas. So kind of touching on what you're reflecting on, Nathan, we've got people that say you need to have this done tomorrow, and that's urgent, and it's your boss or your team that's wanting you to do something. But I'm really trying to, as much as I can, nudge, thinking about what's going to be the most impactful in the future. And it's challenging for me in education because everything I do could benefit somebody. So it's like if I say no, but for example, I had a university that said, "Hey, Joseph, we want you to be on the advisory board. We're going to have weekly meetings for the next 3 years." And I'm like, I'm working with hundreds of universities. I love what you're doing, but I can't spend all that time with you. So that's a tension that I have. But if I can move toward those sector 2, what's going to be most impactful for the whole global education GIS community? That's where I want to be spending more time. I know that's somewhat related to what we're talking about here, but you kind of nudged me into reminding myself that how do I build that in? My old boss, David DiBiase, who's now at Penn State, probably many of you know David because he came up with that GIS ethics site at Penn State, actually had a pretty good, I think, method where Fridays he would not schedule any meetings. In fact, he had a auto response on his email. If you need to talk to me today, being a Friday, text me. I haven't quite gotten to that point yet. But I like that, having a time every week where you can work on these sector 2 things that are going to be most impactful. Okay,
So
I haven't.
a matter of partly just dedicating the time for it and making it a priority.
Yep, and that could include what you're talking about, Nathan, where you're building these reflective times with your team at the end of a project, saying, "What did we learn? How can we move forward?" Indeed. Well, this is a very interesting time, right, for all of us in GIS. And I'm really glad that people were able to spend time this evening, speaking of time, because I know people are busy and you might think, oh, ethics. Yeah, I'm an ethical person. It's those other people, right? I'm a good driver. It's just those other people on the road. And we have an interesting actual segment of our self-assessment here in my organization where maybe some of you do as well. After your main goals, you've got some personal um, characteristics. And every year we have something about ethics, which is interesting. It's like, how can I rate myself on ethics? Either, what am I, a 5?
What's the scale? What's the quality?
That's not a Likert scale. It's like
And
that's
it,
either first and foremost in
and
my
most often it's in the gray
core.
that we learn and discover what should and shouldn't be of concern. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yep. All right, folks. Oh, thanks, Hannah. All right, folks. I wanted to note of my colleagues because they want to talk about GIS Colorado and the wonderful organization and community that we have here in the state. So I'm going to turn it over to Nathan and Ronald.
So thank you so much, Dr. Kerski, for that lovely conversation. Go ahead, Nate.
Great. I did want to talk about briefly GIS Colorado and your geospatial connection. What do we do? We certainly have these quarterly meetings that are in person. This fall, we'll be meeting right before the GIS in the Rockies, and I'll talk about in a moment. We've been being able to help and sponsor scholarships throughout Colorado, share news and events through newsletters. We really are an informal and grassroots network of individuals who work in geospatial technology and application across the state, and would invite all to be participants in the meetups, in these Geo-Ruckus events, and in all other aspects of meeting and networking with your peers. That's really what we're all about. The GIS Colorado's fall meetup will be held at the GIS in the Rockies conference. In fact, it'll be right prior to it, and will feature 3 specialized training workshops designed to empower participants with the latest tools and techniques in spatial data analysis. On Wednesday, September 25th, 2024, join in one of the 3 following training workshops. Enjoy a hands-on radio detection, underground line location, and GIS integration workshop conducted by Ms. Kaylee Mueller, a GIS analyst, and Ms. Kelly Jones, underground locating sales specialist from Frontier Precision in room Marjorie Reed Hall's room 217, or data classification using NV5 geospatial software presented by Dr. Matthew Cross of the University of Colorado, Denver at the Sci Complex in room 5025. Or a third yet to be announced option in the Anderson Academic Commons room of 290 on the University of Denver campus. Cost is $95 each for the 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. course, or $70 for GIS Colorado members. These training workshops cover essential GIS concepts, hands-on experience with leading software, and practical applications in various fields. Whether you are new to GIS or looking to enhance your existing skills, these sessions aim to provide valuable insights and knowledge to help you harness the power of geospatial technology in your projects. Details on the specific content will be finalized closer to the conference date. Then on Thursday, September 26th at 2024, attend GIS in the Rockies, the Rocky Mountain West's premier geospatial information and technology conference. Keynote speaker will be Ms. James Jacobs of Esri, and she'll be speaking from her experiences in high altitude medical rescue, fire suppression, search and rescue, extrication, wildland firefighting, and fire mitigation. Her primary focus is the fusion of remote medicine, situational awareness, and geospatial intelligence. Stay for some of the most compelling GIS and geospatial presentations available on the planet during the engaging and thought-provoking presentations on geospatial technologies and their real-world applications. All activities are planned to be held at the Cable Center on the beautiful campus of the University of Denver. GIS Colorado will be sponsoring a happy hour at the GIS in the Rockies conference on Thursday, September 26th, and we'd love to see you there. The 2024 GIS in the Rockies conference will also feature a GIS Colorado town hall, bringing together GIS professionals from across the state to discuss key industry trends, challenges, and opportunities. This interactive session will serve as a forum for networking, knowledge sharing, and collaborative problem solving, focusing on the unique needs and goals of GIS practitioners in Colorado. Attendees will have the chance to contribute to discussions on professional development and the future direction of GIS in the region, fostering a stronger and more connected professional community. As for GIS Geo-Ruckus, we have plans next month for hosting with Mr. Brady Husted, the CEO and founder of Argis. He'll be speaking on X, Y, and Z augmented reality for ArcGIS field maps, and that'll be on Thursday, October 10th, 6 p.m., 2024. The following month, Thursday, November 7th, Atlas Geo will be speaking on his Lego map of Colorado and Lego mapping in general, topographic mapping. We're very excited about that, and we have plans in the December timeframe to have Dr. Taylor Dorn from Planetary GIS as well. So we're excited to have you all there. And thanks to our sponsors. For those who generally sponsor GIS Colorado throughout the year, and those who make specific sponsorships to any of our meetups. That includes many of those who provide support in the means of lunches and meals during our meetups, or in many of our mapping hour or happy hour activities.
Thank you so much for joining us, and look for more information. Have a beautiful night.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.